I'll say that listening to my background, that all sounds like sort of jumbled, gargled stuff about my background in terms of what I did, at least in my memory, because it's sort of, my life sort of started at 35 as an entrepreneur after sort of leaving corporate America. And so I'll just really briefly tell you the story of sort of our Freedom Solar really quickly. How we sort of started, I would be remiss to not say that I got sober right before I started this business. And that is not a coincidence. There's a correlation between those two things. And so I needed to get sober, which I did. And then I was looking for something to do entrepreneurial. And I've been in corporate finance and sort of been living what I think other people wanted me to do in life. It's sort of sad to say, but I think I did things that were to impress people maybe at cocktail parties. To say that I worked in corporate finance and did so-and-so and had some high-powered job, or at least I thought. And then I got sober and stumbled into sort of this entrepreneurial game, which is trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was looking at solar for my own house. I couldn't find anybody to come explain to me what it cost. And so I started to do the research myself. And I was like, wait a minute, there's got to be other people out there like me trying to figure out what the economics of this are. And so I had no background in that. I had no money. I was recently sober. And so I found a guy who could do that work, who was my partner. And I met him, and I'll never forget, we met at a Mexican food restaurant at El Arroyo, and I sat across from him, and I said, so here's the deal. I want to start a solar company. I think I can run the business, and I think I could sell this stuff, and I can figure out how to finance it, and there's a huge market, particularly in Austin. And he sat across from me, and he said, okay, I believe those things too. I've been doing this for a couple of years. All I know how to do is run crews of guys, design systems, and install solar. I don't even like people. And I was like, awesome. We're going to partner, and we're going to do this. So we started out of his garage like the next Monday. And
what year was this?
That was 14 years ago. So it was 2011. And we started out his garage in Cuernavaca, had $0, negative actually money, because I was in debt, and we sort of built the business from there. But the idea from an entrepreneurial perspective was, could we go solve this problem, and was there a market to sort of provide this service to customers? And it turned out there was. And so we just sort of turned one thing into the next, and the first year was, could we do $1 million? And the next year was, could we do $5 million? And then could we do $10 million? And it sort of went on until we sort of went from a baby company to maybe a medium-sized company, sort of a couple $100 million. And all the growth that sort of comes through the ups and downs of that. I think you sort of start off as a small business, and there's those pains, and then you get to the next tranche, which is maybe the $25 to $75 million area that companies sort of go to die in many cases. And you sort of get through that, and then you sort of get to the next level, which is maybe $150 million, and all the different challenges that come with that. But we've been very fortunate because we did it in Austin, and there still seems to be a market for it today. We've been growing the business a bunch. A couple of years ago, I sold 40% of the business-ish to 2 private equity firms. So we've sort of been through the evolution of, now we have to be a big boy company with boards and, a different set of criteria and accountability. And so I'm fortunate that we've sort of gone from the beginning to where we are today, and we're still humming along.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Maybe tell us a little bit about, as you know, starting a business is not easy, and we can't do it without encouragement from others. And it really is about resilience and perseverance. So, tell us a little bit about how you got through that.
So, encouragement. I think about. I identify as an entrepreneur now. That's sort of a thing that I've sort of locked my teeth into, which is to say. That idea of sort of burning the lifeboats and trying some idea and going to do something, and I'm going to make it work no matter what, is a unique characteristic I found. And I think in my experience, maybe I'll give you an example of encouragement and how valuable it is. 'Cause I know a lot of people in here are mentors or involved in that. When I was before I started the business, my sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous said to me, are you willing to go to any length to get sober? And I said, yes, I'm willing to go to any length. And about 2 weeks later, he said, I'd like for you to go to this men's retreat in Bastrop, Texas for recovery for men. And I was like, no, I'm good. I don't want to go to Bastrop, Texas with a bunch of dudes I don't know. And he said, well, I thought that you were willing to go to any length. I said, okay, send me the address, I'll go. And so I go to this retreat, and there's a guest speaker. And so, sort of like this, and we're sitting around, there's a guy who gets up and he tells his story. And his story was really impactful. I'll paraphrase it because it's sort of important, but he says, he was explaining that where he was in his sobriety journey, he got to the end of his rope. And so he was sitting on the end of his bed, and it was 5 a.m, and he was done. He had nowhere else to go. The only solution he had at that moment was to shoot himself and to kill himself. And so he sat on the end of his bed, and he asked God to forgive him, and he loaded a pistol, and he put the pistol in his mouth, and he pulled the trigger. And when he pulled the trigger, the gun jammed. And he heard a voice. And the voice said, you haven't tried everything. And he knew what that meant. And so he took the gun out of his mouth and he set it down. And he waited till the first AA meeting was started around the corner, which is at a place called Northland that I go to all the time. And he drives himself over to this meeting at Northland. And he walks into this meeting and he sits down, and it's sort of a smaller meeting in the morning. And it's sort of a messed up meeting. It's sort of a 1% of the time you go to a meeting and it's not that great. There was sort of some infighting and it was sort of disorganized and it wasn't the greatest, but he identified himself as this was his first meeting. And so he gets to the meeting and he's like, wow, that's really not for me. I guess I gave it the best shot. I'm gonna drive back home and finish the job. And so he walks across the parking lot, and a guy that's now my friend also grabs him and says, hold on a second. You said this was your first meeting. That was sort of a weird meeting. Could you stay and go to this next one with me, because there's another meeting coming up? And so this guy says, my friend Aaron says, yeah, I'll do that. And that was 18 years ago. And that guy is still sober today. And when I went to that meeting and he told that story, I was sort of blown away. And after the meeting, I'm sitting next to him, we're sitting around a campfire, and he says to me, so what do you do for work? I said, man, I'm 2 weeks sober. I don't work. I'm trying to keep it together. I'm trying not to drink. And he said, well, okay, we started talking a little bit. He said, have you looked at solar? I was like, I don't, solar's sort of a joke. And he was like, well, you ought to look at it. And he sort of explained to me why. And I went from that meeting that weekend and sort of started to look at it, and all the things he said were correct. And I sort of put some research to it, and we ended up starting this business. Fast forward 7 years from that time, okay? I go start Freedom Solar. The company becomes sort of a company. And I called that guy, and he now works for me. And I work with that guy every single day, and he runs our sales group. And I remember I hired him, and I said, could you come do this job for me? And I think the goal was like $5 million a month or something that we were trying to get to. And he was like, yeah, I think I can get it there. And so fast forward a couple of years, and he gets it to $50 million a month. And I work with this dude every single day, and it's such a pleasure. And in that example alone, my sponsor telling me, hey, go to this thing I don't want to go to, the encouragement to go do something I don't want to go do, which ultimately sort of saved my life. For me to run into Aaron and his situation in that AA environment where someone grabbed him by the shoulder and said, hey, could you come to this other meeting? That saved that guy's life, which saved my life. I don't know, I've worked with 100 guys that have gone through recovery. He's worked with probably more than that. That's directly a couple hundred people whose lives were saved. And then it gave me the opportunity to go start this business, which I would have never had. And so I sort of break it down. If I was just to think about that example alone, this idea of encouragement is, I think as entrepreneurs, you're looking to start a spark, a thing, right? I've got an idea, there's this problem, I'm trying to solve it. I'm trying to start the spark. And from the spark, you get to sort of hopefully a bonfire, and then a bonfire to maybe a brush fire, and then a brush fire to like a forest fire, right? A Yeti. Or, there's lots of companies in town that we know that have turned into just straight up forest fires, right? They just catch on and go. But it starts with a spark. And that spark is usually around encouragement. Because I still come to something like this and I suffer from imposter syndrome. I'm like, why do these people want me to talk about anything? I sort of I think we all maybe at the heart have that. And it's sort of nice when someone says to you, hey, you can do that thing. Hey, take that risk. Hey, this is worth trying. And in many cases, I know in my life, just in that example, those sequence of events would have never happened if it weren't for a little bit of encouragement in the early days. So I think it's sort of an overlooked thing, but it's a really valuable thing to give somebody the pat on the back and say, hey, you can do this thing. I know there's people in this room who have benefited from that too. Okay, I'll shut up about encouragement.
Oh, please don't. That's amazing.
I could go on about that.
I love a good origin story, and that's probably the best one I've heard. Okay. And I'm trying not to cry up here. Honestly. Really impactful, and it's beautiful. But let's stick on encouragement. We got a room full of mentors here. And this whole program's about mentoring folks. And, we're talking about business, but you're also showing that, life is so much bigger than business as well. But maybe just talk about mentorship and how those mentors have been impactful for your life.
Yeah, I would say as an entrepreneur, finding people who have been a little bit farther down the highway of life than you, that have a little less tread on the tire, that have seen it, been there and done it, and going to seek those people out is sort of, I could list 5 people right off the top of my head that I go to all the time. And they're sort of uniquely qualified for different problems. Maybe a finance guy, maybe a marketing guy, maybe an entrepreneur guy, maybe just someone that's sort of an uplifting guy that's always positive. Roy Spence is that guy for me from GSD&M. Whenever I'm super down and bummed out, I call Roy. And I leave Roy's office 100% of the time thinking to myself, what problem was I just there for? Because I'm he just has that way about him. And so mentorship is sort of 2 sides in my experience. I'll talk about maybe being on the receiving end of mentorship for a second. When I got sober, there were a list of people that I owed amends to, which is people that I needed to go to and make things right for things I had screwed up. And I had one guy on this list who I was very, very scared about going to see. And there's an airport named after him in Houston, and he's inducted in the Business Hall of Fame, and he's a very successful guy in Texas. And I looked up to him, and I owed him an amends for how I behaved. And so he's on the list, and I'll never forget this. I texted him, and I said, can you meet with me at a Starbucks in Houston? And we hadn't talked in a long time because our relationship was strained, and he said, yeah, I can meet with you. And I said, okay, meet me at this Starbucks on Westheimer, and I'll meet you there at so-and-so time. And so I showed up there, and it was a rainy morning. And I sat in my truck, and I had all this stuff written out about what I wanted to say about this amends. And it was maybe just thinking about it right now sort of scares me because I was so scared in that moment to go confront this issue. I had no idea how he would respond. It was sort of the first time in my life, honestly, that I had sort of turn things over to a higher power, that act of I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to turn this over to the universe. And so I said that sort of prayer in my truck, and I go inside and I have this amends with this man. And I had all my papers, and I sat down, and we sort of went through it. And I said what I was intended to say. And he sat there, and he said, I don't know how you want me to respond to this exactly. I'm not sure how this AA thing works, and I'm not really sure what an amends is. But if you're asking me, do I forgive you? I do. I was like, okay. So, sort of makes me teary-eyed thinking about it. So he stood up, and he shook my hand. Didn't give me a hug like maybe your mom or your sister or your sibling would do, but he just shook my hand, and he said, "I forgive you." And he walked out of the other exit of the building, and I walked out of the other one, and I went back to my truck, and I was like, "Whew, okay." Turn that over to my higher power. He didn't kill me. He didn't rip my head off. He didn't say all the things I was scared he was going to say. And then we sort of repaired the relationship a little bit. And over time, he became a mentor for me. And he checked in with me, and I reached out to him. And fast forward about 5 years, and somebody called me, some private equity firm, and they wanted to buy our business. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really even know what that meant. And so I called him, and I said, "Hey, do you know such and such private equity firm in Houston? They're interested in buying our business." He said, "Well, hold on a second. What are you doing? If you want to keep running the business, get on a plane tomorrow and fly to Telluride and meet me. If you want to sell the whole business, sell it to those guys." So I jumped on a plane, and I flew to Telluride, and I sold him a part of the business. And he's my partner today, and he's on our board, and I meet with him all the time. And last week, I was probably the most stressed out I've been in our business in 14 years. And I was on the phone with him like a bad girlfriend, like a couple times a day, just calling him nonstop to be like, "What do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now?" And so I would say the value of mentorship for me is I can't grade my own paper. I'm incapable of grading my own paper. I'll BS myself. I'll rationalize my own behavior. I'll do things in my own echo chamber that sort of give an outcome that I want to have. And the value to me of this mentorship thing is like so profound because it gets me out of that perspective and gives me another way to look at things, which is often the right way to look at things, which I could never get to myself. The flip side to it is in those opportunities where we're given the gift to be a mentor to someone else, which I've been able to do, and many people in here have been able to do. I don't know about you, but it gives me a chance to get out of myself in that moment. And I find that really, really valuable. When I go spend time with someone to work through their problem or their issue, I get out of my own head. I get out of my own self for 30 minutes or an hour, or however long it is, and get to just deal with whatever it is they're dealing with. And that becomes so valuable. I hate to say it, but like my default is to think about myself all the time. It's not a great characteristic. It's sort of an embarrassing thing to say in front of my girlfriend and people that I don't know. But it's sort of one of my character defects. And so to get out of myself and be able to go help other people becomes as useful to me as it does being on the other end of that part. So I find it very valuable. I could go on and on again about mentorship, but it's hugely impactful, and it's the spark that sort of starts the thing for many people, certainly me.
And I think that's human nature. It's not just you. A lot of us it's that ego, right?
Yeah,
it's just
my
part of
pride
life.
and my ego. Yeah.
But I love it. I mean, it is getting out of your own head, and it's kind of a release, and I love that.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're taking in mentoring or giving it away.
Yeah.
So maybe talk a little bit about on the business side and the life side of things. You know, again, as an entrepreneur, nothing ever goes perfect, right?
No.
We only wish it would get close to perfect, but oftentimes, you know, tailwinds can turn into headwinds, and
Yeah.
that's when the road gets really bumpy. So maybe share a little bit about some of the stories that you've gone through in your life, you know, with Freedom and others.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, if I think about tailwinds and headwinds, oftentimes I've lived through tailwinds. I didn't know they were tailwinds. I just thought that's the way the world worked. You know, I'll never forget, I'd lived through tailwinds, starting a solar company in Austin, Texas 14 years ago. It was a good place to start a company at that time in the solar industry. And the world kind of shifted, and I think about a time where a friend of mine was a very successful guy, had started a business from zero, got it to $1 billion, sold it. I went to Jackson Hole to go fly fish with him, and I was chewing glass. The business was like, it felt like I was working all the time, and we were just everything we could do to sort of have forward momentum. And I remember I was sitting on this fly fishing boat with him, and we're fly fishing, and he's on the front of the boat, and I'm on the back, and fishing. He said, "How's business going?" I was like, it's like chewing glass. It's sort of the Elon phrase. It's like chewing glass and looking into the abyss. Like, it is so painful, I don't even know what to do. And he started to laugh on the front of the boat. And I was like, what is so funny about that? And he said, well, what did you think this was going to be like? I said, well, I thought it was going to be sort of, like it had been in the past. And so he laughs, and he tells me this story about how he, in his business, had sold 40% of it. And there was this moment where it was on the edge. It was about to go to zero. And he had all these employees, and he had to go to his management team and say, I can no longer pay you. I'm not going to get paid, and we have to thread the needle from 1,000 yards away and do this thing. And they did the thing, and the business survived. And he's like, that's what you signed up for as an entrepreneur. Like, if you thought it was just going to go from the bottom left to the top right and was going to be this lovely little ride, that's not entrepreneurship. This is getting your teeth kicked in. This is chewing glass. This is suffering the downflows. And so hearing that from someone else, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a couple of years ago. It sort of gave me, it gave me this sense of like, oh, okay, this is part of the journey. Like, don't freak out because you're chewing glass, you're going through this super hard thing, you don't know what to do. Recognize it's part of the journey. And so I'd say today, in the solar industry is sort of tougher than it's been in a long time. I think about, there's sort of two kinds of CEOs in the world. I think we've all sort of seen this. There's sort of peacetime CEOs and there's wartime CEOs. If you were to kind of paraphrase those things, a peacetime CEO is somebody that has a tailwind, can think about the culture, can think about the strategy, can think about buy-in, can think about big picture stuff, where we're going to go. And then when you're in, sort of the crisis mode, it's very short term. It is literally like I can only see through the windshield, and maybe I can see the end of the hood. But I cannot see it's too foggy, there's too much rain, I don't know where we're going, but I can only see that far. And that's about sort of wartime CEO stuff, which is like, I got to let people go. I got to close down locations that don't work. I got to do hard things. I've got to make really short-term decisions to keep things going. And so today I sort of think about that a lot, which is tailwinds turn to headwinds. The characteristics to change that thinking is really important, and to recognize that, and to be able to sort of switch back and forth, which is very hard to do. It's very hard. There's not that many. That's a unique situation to be able to look way down the road and then also deal with the real short-term stuff. They're sort of different personalities, and you sort of have to switch between the two. But I've found that sort of, in my experience, we have this thing called radical transparency at Freedom Solar. I have it in my relationship too. This radical transparency idea is to say, I'm going to tell you what's going on. Sometimes you will like it, and sometimes you will not like it. But I'm committing to always tell you the truth. That's my commitment. And so I've been doing that in our business since the beginning, and the bigger it's gotten, the more it sort of freaks out my management team. When you bring big general counsels in and these kinds of people, and they're like, you're going to talk about what with these people? Like, are you kidding me? And so I have a weekly call in our business where I have an all-hands call, and I tell everyone in the company, like this month we're doing it every week. Usually I do it once a month, which is to tell people what's going on, the truth. Sometimes it's good, love those calls, and sometimes it's not very good. We're struggling with this. Here's what the EBITDA is, like talking about EBITDA, first of all, talking about the cash flow of the business, what the real problems are. But what I've found is in doing that, you treat people like adults. And the byproduct of that is they appreciate that, and then they have trust. And so they turn around and treat me with the same level of trust and commitment that I sort of did with them. And if I was to sort of just break it down, it's sort of like if I build trust with my people and my team, trust ultimately creates good relationships. Good relationships create great teams. Great teams create badass businesses. But it starts with trust. And so it's that idea of sort of having radical transparency with the people that you work with so that everyone sort of knows what's going on. If you think about the opposite of that, it's like people don't know what's happening. And then if you leave it up to people just talking about it, they create some outrageous scenario for whatever's going on and people live in fear. But if I tell you what's happening, even if it's not great, then we at least know, okay, we need to pick up the paddles and we need to paddle that way. That's the way we get out of this thing. I need everyone to pick up a paddle and paddle that way. And if I do that in a transparent way, we can do that more efficiently. Otherwise, people are paddling in circles and you don't know what the hell is going on. And so I would say that sort of coming back to that, saying that out loud, sort of to hear myself, remind myself of that, which is if I just tell people what's going on, the truth, we get some bonding out of that. Oh, by the way, if you're going through hard stuff, you actually have an opportunity to have more bonding. We've all experienced that. And then we get a better team, and then my team is really willing to go chew through walls to make stuff happen. And that's what I want, is a team that'll chew through walls. So I think I went long on that answer.
That's fine. That's good. It's a great answer. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Are you okay if we take some questions?
Sure.
Yeah. Why don't we open up for any questions from the audience? Or Becky had her hand first. And
I forgot.
I can hear you.
My name is Becky Taylor. It's nice to hear from you.
Hi, Becky.
The transparency thing is very interesting from so many perspectives. But one, I was wondering if ever there was a time when you had to share some not so great news with your team and you got an unexpected idea from an unexpected quarter that really helped you with the problem. And had you not shared, that person wouldn't have known to help you. Secondly, in this climate right now, are there areas such as the administration-induced changes in our relationship with clean energy that are outside the scope of any one business? How do you choose to discuss that in the context of transparency with your team?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things I think about that I've shared a bunch with this transparency idea that's helped in really hard stuff. So like hard stuff is firing people. It's one of the worst, right? We've sort of all experienced that, but going through layoffs is sort of like the most painful thing to do, in my experience. The upside of the transparency thing, as an example, when you talk about layoffs, is if I can sit down with my people and say, look, our volume is down, and when the volume is down, it crushes the EBITDA, and we're on the wrong side of operating leverage, and we've had those discussions for multiple months. When you end up having to have layoffs, people aren't surprised. And so I would say that one of my jobs is to not have surprises. I want to minimize the surprises to the people in my organization so that when you go through that super hard thing, which is, right, we have to lay off a bunch of people this Friday. No, we don't this Friday, but we've had to on Fridays. When we do that, it's not a huge shock. And I've sat in a room with people and had to lay off a lot of people and done that. And been in sort of these you can see I cry easy. You've noticed that today. And so I've been in these moments where I had to lay off people and I've literally been in tears and I've said, listen, this is not personal. This is a business decision and I hate that it's happening, but I'm willing to help you do whatever I can. And sort of my dad used to say the proof is in the pudding. And so the proof is in the pudding in that statement. And I've gone and written letters of recommendations and had so many of these people that I've laid off that still communicate with me, that I still have a great relationship, that I helped find other jobs, that turned this thing that was a really painful experience into a great experience where they found some other gig that I helped them find, that their career has taken off, and they communicate with me. And that's been like a lovely thing, which was a really painful experience that actually turned out to be okay. As it relates to sort of macro things that I can't control, I think about, I'll use the car analogy again, which is like, there's things inside this vehicle with my team that I get to control. I can control the music and the temperature and the effort and what we're doing and sort of where we're directed. Outside the car, maybe a hailstorm, which is sort of what it's like in the solar industry today. It's sort of massively painful where you're just like, I can't believe the administration is doing X, Y, and Z. But there also is something sort of bonding about that from teammates, which is like, hey, we're going to go no matter what and get through this thing. And we talk about sort of the macro environment, which is this too shall pass, you know, in everything. This too shall pass, whether it's good or it's bad. Like, things don't last forever. And so as an entrepreneur, I sort of go back to the idea of like, there are moments and times where the macro things are just hailstorms pushing against the car and we're just trying to make it through. But this too shall pass, and sort of reminding everyone that maybe it takes 6 weeks, 6 months, a couple years. But as entrepreneurs and as a team, like, grit is the thing that wins. It just does, in my experience. Grit sort of, if there was one characteristic of entrepreneurs that really ultimately gets to the finish line more often than anything else, it's grit. It's not the smartest person. It's not the luckiest person. It's like the grit. And I think when you're sort of going against a big headwind, you have an opportunity to build more grit with your team because you're sort of getting through a harder situation. And usually this too shall pass and it turns to a tailwind. But then it's really important at that moment to recognize the tailwind and to say, okay, things are going our way. Okay, let's keep going and let's sort of make hay while we can. And recognizing that again from sort of the CEO perspective of short-term stuff to being like, okay, now we need to focus on the long-term stuff. Okay, quick, change direction here. Sorry, I'm going along on your answer.
Gaines, did you have?
Thank you.
Essentially the same as Becky, only I would ask if you don't mind sharing, and if you do, that's fine. If you don't, that's your decision. Just generally, where do you see, I guess the last few years we've had lots of incentives, which I've taken advantage of myself.
Good.
And a lot of people have, but going forward, what percentage do you see the difference next year versus this year as far as the business?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one my board asks me all the time. There's a cliff. How far is the cliff? How deep is the cliff? Can I see the bottom? Time will tell. Short term will tell. The answer to the question in terms of percentage is probably a 50% drop. If you look at analyst reports and you sort of believe what the street says. I think the silver lining to it is the price of power in our industry drives everything. It drives everything. So it's why places like California have a 26% penetration rate and Texas has a 4%. The price of power here is 10 cents. The price of power in California is 30, sometimes 60. So is the price of power going up drives the adoption of solar more than any single thing, more than incentives, more than anything. And so I think the sort of strange silver lining of the administration and what's happening is you bring renewables offline and you have all the pressure that we have on the supply side, the price of power is going to go up. Everyone sort of agrees with that more than they ever have in the last 15 years. How much and exactly when, of course, is sort of subjective, but it is going up. And so it's sort of one of those things, if you can get through the dip, like the other side, there's less competition. This stuff really has a huge adoption rate. You sort of have to stay in the saddle is what I tell my team. You know, it's a bucking horse and it's bucking a bunch. But if you stay in the saddle, this thing will sort of break. and we'll get to the other side of it because this too shall pass, to tell myself that. So I think it's a cliff for sure, but I think the other side of it ends up being a world we want to live in here, which is, at least in our business, I think solar adoption, everybody sort of understands if all else was equal, they would rather get their power from the sun than they would pulling it out of the ground, right? And so if the economics can support that decision, you start to see this stuff really take off. So does that take a year or two? Probably. But that's probably the time frame I would give it. So we're going to try to stay in the saddle for a year or two.
Maybe one more. I think, Mitch, you had your hand.
Well, I was going to ask the same question, so, but I will ask a different question, which is since I got into all this 2009, solar was just really getting going in Texas. We've had many solar companies in Austin and Central Texas that have come and gone. How did you? I mean, you explained a little bit about your personal life and how you sustained, but how did you sustain a solar company through the last 17 years?
So I think one of the things that we benefited from is I sort of had this perspective. I've had to change it, by the way. As an entrepreneur, you sort of have to believe one thing, and then sort of the market changes, and you sort of have to change. But I believed over the last 10 years that being an inch wide and a mile deep was really important. So when it comes to solar and what we do, we call it distributed generation, which is we're behind the meter solar. So we put solar on houses and commercial industrial locations. We need to be very focused on being the best in the business at that particular discipline. That's not to do, financing. It's not to do, utility scale projects. It's not to do all the other things that are sort of shiny things that you could have gotten distracted by, that a lot of solar companies did get distracted by and try to switch to do other things. We sort of went really deep into being very effective. It's a service business, which is to say, if we do a good job for you as a customer at your home, for example, if we do a great job for you, you might tell other people at a dinner party. But only if we do a great job. If we do a good job, whatever. And if we do a bad job, you'll also tell people. So as a service business, you must do a great job, because customer acquisition cost is where companies like ours live or die. And so how you get customers and what that costs is a huge piece. So we really bent over backwards to sort of provide good service and understand our role in that, if that makes sense. I will also tell you, as I said, that you sometimes have to change that. So I just sat in a board meeting last month, and we had been an inch wide and a mile deep. Solar PV and batteries, that's all we do. We know everything about how to do that, and every application of that, we're experts at that. Well, when that well dries up, you better think of something else. And so we've had to sort of pivot a little bit. So we started an HVAC business. We started a generator business. We've gotten heavily into the battery side. So we're sort of thinking of ourselves more as a home power business, is maybe how I'd characterize that, as opposed to just a solar PV business or a storage business. I'll let you know how that goes. Yeah, stay tuned. Sure. I'm sorry. You're the moderator, not me.
Yeah, so back to the cost of power and that driving your business. I was just reading yesterday about, the data center, the AI data center things are just driving power costs for everybody up, right? So I assume that's going to help you. Of course, they're also pushing on nuclear because, those things run 24/7. They can't, go when the sun shines or the wind blows or whatever, right? And the most intriguing thing I read about that was how China's kicking our butt now in this, just like they did in solar panels. We invented the solar tech, they drove it and they sourced it. Our nuclear power plants are costing 15 cents per watt to build, and theirs are 2 cents a watt because they're doing a similar kind of play. Yeah. So I'm just curious how that, I think you're probably good. It probably helps you, right? I'm guessing on your cost model because power goes up, home market, right? But curious how that plays.
Yeah. So the the data center trend is obviously this great push on baseload power. And there are other sources to provide sort of the best solution for baseload power that are sort of more nuclear related and natural gas to a certain extent. I think at the end of the day, you've got sort of more demand than you have supply. And that's sort of creating what will be an imbalance that continues sort of going down the road. And so I'm not someone who says it should be all solar and that's the solution, or all wind and that's the solution. I just think it is part of the solution, of which we need many solutions. So I feel like that trend is a positive one for renewables, not in the super short term, not next month, probably not in the next 6 months, but I was listening to the NVIDIA CEO talk about data centers and sort of the phenomenon of that in China and sort of what's going on there. And it's interesting to hear what he says about that. He's much more intelligent than I am about this subject matter. But his comment was, this is a power problem, period. Without access to the power that we need, nothing happens. The AI revolution doesn't happen, data centers do not happen, the manufacturing world doesn't happen. It is the constraint to the platform of which all of these industries are built. And without that, we are at a great disservice. And other places, like China, are not. And they're gonna blow us away in terms of advancement because they've sort of solved this problem. And so he sort of identified it as this is the crux of the issue, and it's gotta be solved. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, but I think if we can stay in the saddle, solar is not a great solution for data centers specifically, to the point you made, which is they have too much demand all the time, and solar sort of is like a flea on the back of an elephant in terms of what it can do power-wise for those facilities, but it puts a ton of strain for baseload power, and so they've got to go find power on the edges. And I think there's a lot of companies in town, Base Power is here that's doing a lot of work around sort of this edge of the grid, sort of deployment of power at the right times when it needs it in the wholesale market. And so I think you'll see a lot of innovation around the edges, but it's generally a great trend. We like it. We're quietly smiling in the background.
One final question.
A lot of companies, you don't want to be the bearer of bad news. And I kind of get the impression in your company that you work to make sure that's not the issue. Can you tell me how you've created that culture?
I would say in our business, my job is to find the truth, period, as the CEO. Which is to say, we all make decisions running businesses that are imperfect. We're making decisions with the most amount of information that we have, which is usually not all the information we need to make a decision in a fully qualified way, so you have to do the best you can. And so I think about our executive team, for example, that I meet with every week, and sort of what I want to come out of that. And if you can create a culture in which you don't, this is very hard to do. And sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't. But if you can create a culture in which there is a collective agreement that we are just searching for the truth, which is to say, I don't give a shit about credit or blame. All I want to do is find the truth. And so if I brought an idea to the executive team and it doesn't work, it's not my job to keep pushing, my initiative because it's my initiative, because I want it, because I have some vested interest. It was my idea. And so if you sort of can pull that stuff away and just look at the results and the truth, and you say that stuff out loud a lot, you can sort of create a culture around this idea of sort of just talking about the truth. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But again, it's sort of a commitment to say, I'm not going to BS my employees. And the respect that sort of comes around out of that, I've been sort of profoundly blown away by. You build an incredible amount of loyalty with people by doing that, which sounds sort of ridiculous because you're like, well, yeah, but it's real easy to mess that up. It's real easy to mess that up. But we sort of have to say it out loud a lot and sort of remind ourselves, okay, what are we doing here? We're just looking to figure out the truth, whatever that is. Oh, we tried this idea. The results are not good. Okay, that's the truth. Step on the brake. Oh, we tried this idea. The results look pretty good. Step on the gas. Let's do more of that. Who cares where it came from? It doesn't matter. Let's just look at the results to make as good of a decision as we can and then apply the gas and the brake where appropriate. That's all I want to do as sort of a leader, and then create an environment where people recognize that, because then they're less worried about, you know, all the things we've lived through of like the politics of a business and my idea, and I have to deal with this person to get my idea to work. It's just about sort of the results, whether it works or not. And then we just work in a radically transparent world in which we tell the truth. And I think there becomes something sort of bonding about that people appreciate and respect. But it's hard to do. It's hard. We sort of have to talk about it a lot. I'm looking at Lauren that works with me, and she's like, yeah, we have to talk about it a lot.